agenda today. And I just want to welcome everybody. It is Friday, and you know, it's a good day. It's beautiful outside, and I know everybody's looking forward to the weekend. We always like to be able to get together with our youth justice partners, and they're more than partners, they're our friends. And hopefully, maybe soon, that we can be back together again in the same room and, you know, eating those box lunches. Who would have ever thought we would have missed those box lunches? But you know, I'm ready. You know, it's kind of like, you know, people would complain about a CAD that we had Calypso every time. You know, I could eat some Calypso from that CAD. So we do welcome you. We appreciate you coming. We know that you know, you're going to learn so much. I mean, we all do every time we come together. Um, if you have questions, please put them in your chat. When a speaker is speaking, if you'd be kind enough to mute your screen, we would appreciate it. But you're more than welcome to show yourself. We see smiling faces, and we like that. But if you know, mute yourself, there is some handouts from some of the speakers, so you're going to be getting some information. I know Dr. Elion has a PowerPoint, so you know, you'll need your, you know, to be able to see that. Zanera will make sure you get copies of everything, or for those who are on the phone.
Will hit record for us, please. That way we'll record for those who couldn't attend to.
Oh, I got Dana's full introduction.
Thank you.
So we have a good group here, and so I think it would help the speakers to kind of know where the people are from. So I'm just going to call out people that I see, and Amy, you want to start with you?
Sure. You just want introductions? Or yeah, Amy Jones, Madison County Juvenile Court.
Okay. Erica?
Erica Sheffield, DCS, the IO Program Coordinator for West Tennessee and Tennessee Valley.
Kimberly? You're on mute. You're on mute, Kim.
I'm sorry. Good morning. My name is Kimberly Smith. I'm an independent living specialist with the Southwest region, and I also cover 2 counties, Wayne and Perry, in South Central.
Somebody just joined us, and there's not a name up there, and I'm sorry, I don't recognize her. Oh, we'll come back. Andrea?
I'm Andrea Gammon with Dyer County Juvenile Court.
Okay. Vicki Taylor?
Vicki Taylor, Juvenile Justice Specialist with the Tennessee Commission on Children.
Beth?
This is David with
okay.
Juvenile Court in Benton County. I have Beth and Jamie with me.
Okay. Deborah? You're on mute if you're talking. Deborah? Maybe she stepped away. Alicia?
That's Debbie Feasanton. She's with the Shelby County Sheriff's Office.
Oh, okay. Alicia Ramsey? And she may have stepped away as well. She's with the Crockett County Juvenile Court.
She said she does not. She said she does not have a mic or a camera.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, you're reading. Okay, now I see it. Thank you. Jenny?
Jeannie don't have a mic.
Oh, okay. You want to answer for and introduce yourself too?
I'm Brian Stafford with the Carroll County Juvenile Court, and we have Janitha Pearson here also, and Ryan McQuestion.
Thanks. Karen Parker.
Karen doesn't have a mic. This is Andrea. That's Karen
Okay.
Parker from Dyer County.
Well, it sounds like with all this, CARES Act money, we need to invest in some upgraded equipment. Katie Cannon.
So she may not have a mic, but Katie's the TCCY intern.
Thank you, Craig.
Yep.
Christy Hailing. Christy may have stepped away. She's our Upper Cumberland Regional Coordinator for TCCY.
Dana?
Robert Gatewood. I need to apologize. I'm not sure where Robert's from. Can someone? Oh, no mic, no camera. What court are you with, Robert? Okay, we'll come back to him. Oh, he works with the Shelby County Sheriff's Office with Deborah. Okay, thank you, Robert. I apologize. You were on last time and I apologize. Okay, we have 2 or 3 more people that don't have names connected to them. So if y'all would just chime in and tell us where you're from.
I may be one of them. I'm Lisa Reasons. I'm a YSO with Haywood Juvenile Court.
Thank you, Lisa.
And Dana,
Is there
one
any-
of them may be me.
Maybe you, Zanera.
One of them. If
Oh,
you don't have
okay.
a name.
She's
that's
our
why I called
juvenile
you.
justice specialist as well at Central Office. Susan Cope.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Susan Cope. I'm with the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth. I'm the Mid-Cumberland Coordinator.
Okay, who has not shared their name and where they're from? If you would do that.
I'm Melissa Douglas. I'm the Youth Service Officer for Fayette County.
It's good to see you, Melissa. So Dr. Elion and Craig, hopefully that will kind of give you some idea of who is with us. I see that Jill Stott joined us, and she is our Northeast Regional Coordinator. And so we really appreciate the other coordinators coming on board as well.
We've also got Pam West with McNairy County and Dawn Hemby with Lauderdale.
Oh, okay. I don't see that. You're monitoring the chat for us, and I appreciate that. So we've got a great group, and several courts represented, and we just appreciate your participation so much. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about our first speaker. And most of you have seen or heard or know Craig very well, but Craig Hargrow is our Deputy Executive Director for TCCY, and he is currently and has been the Youth Justice Director as well. And so Craig keeps us informed of all of the changes and new information coming out regarding youth justice. And so we always appreciate Craig. He always comes on and he always just has invaluable information to share. So Craig, going to turn it over to you.
Good deal. And so I'm going to get right to it. I've got about 10-ish minutes. I'm a little nervous. My bosses, Vicky and Z, are on. I didn't know they were going to be on here. So it just makes me nervous when I have to present in front of them. So y'all bear with me as I pull up my stuff. So I don't have a PowerPoint today. I normally do. I just want to talk to y'all a few minutes and respond to any questions about two things. And so I want to share some information with you to help you better understand some of Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth's youth justice priorities. I think it'll give you better context regarding why we advocate for certain things and how we are and intend to use our federal dollars that we receive from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. I'm going to go ahead and put this disclaimer out before I get into it. It's not going to be favorable for the agency. It's not going to put us in a great light. I'm going to talk about some things that we're aspiring to do, and so I might mention some things, and you might think, I didn't know they were doing that. And that's because we're not doing a good job of it, probably. And so I think it's important to be transparent and share information if we're going to, improve the system and if the agency is going to improve. And so that's where I'm headed first. And so I want to talk about the 3-year plan that we put together. And I say we, I mean Vicki and Zanera. Give you some background regarding that. And so most of you know, most if not all of you know, that we receive federal dollars through the Department of Justice, through the Office of Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And to receive those federal dollars every year, we have to submit an application. And the application, we call it the 3-year plan, because the application basically is telling the Office of Justice and Delinquency Prevention what we are planning to do with the money that we receive for the next 3 years. And so every year we submit our application, prepare a plan. Year 1 is the 3-year plan, and then the 2 following years are updates. So that's the cycle that the plan runs. And in the 3-year plan, there are priorities that are set out that OJGDP says you have to address. And then there's priorities set out in the plan that the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth, the state of Tennessee, desires and aspires to address. I'm going to cover just 2 or 3, maybe 4 of the priorities that OJGDP says we have to address, just to give folks some insight regarding where we believe our agency is headed. And so here are some things that we're required to address. So the plan that we submit to the Office of Justice and Delinquency Prevention, it has to contain an analysis of gender-specific services for the prevention and treatment of juvenile delinquency. And so I've said it before, the data bears it out, but I've told this group before that the fastest growing population within youth justice are young women. And so it is satisfying this requirement is more than having a separate facility for our young women. It's more about programming, analyzing data that speaks to the delinquent acts that young women are engaged in, the type of treatment they need. And so one of the things that I'm interested in, just as you have time, or as you have time, just send me, if you have gender specific services, send me an email, a description, so that we could have that on file, and so we can start keeping data on that, and put some funds toward that. All of our grants require that the grantee address gender specific services. And so that's one of the things that we're leaning into pretty hard. Another part of the plan says we have to provide, the state of Tennessee has to provide alternatives to detention for status offenders. We're doing things in that arena already. Survivors of commercial sexual exploitation and others, where appropriate, such as specialized or problem-solving courts, or diversion to home-based community services, or treatment for youth that are in need of mental health, substance abuse, or co-occurring disorder services. And then we're supposed to address those at the time that youth comes in first contact with the youth justice system. And so I mentioned that because there seems to be, and it's anecdotal because I don't have data, but in my conversations with folks from DCS and the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services and other folks, there's a question regarding whether or not we have adequate facilities for our justice-involved youth who also have mental health, behavioral health issues. The data says that about 70% of the youth that come in contact with the youth justice system have some of those issues. And I mean, moreover, most of the data and the research indicates or surmises that that's an underreported number. And so that's something that we're leaning into and we'll be addressing. I'm currently reading some documentation and looking for evidence regarding mental health courts. So I know that there are several throughout the nation, but the data is kind of sparse. And so that's something I'm keeping my eye on. And so if any of y'all come across anything like that or desire to get involved in that, let us know. Got about a minute, so let me rush through. And so let me touch one other thing, and then I'm going to address isolation, and then I'm going to be finished. So the plan also requires to reduce the number of children housed in secure detention and correction facilities, and that's not new. Who are awaiting placement in residential residential programs. And so here's we know that we have youth sitting in detention centers far too long, waiting to be placed in proper placement. Folks are calling me and telling me that meetings that's being discussed. So we know what's happening, and I have all this anecdotal information, but I don't know how often it's happening. I don't know how long they're staying in detention. I don't know the demographics of the youth that are staying in detention way too long, waiting for residential placement. And then so if someone doesn't reach out to TCCY or whomever and provides that information, we just don't know it. But it's something that we're supposed to address. And so what I would like to get some feedback on in a minute or two is if I prepared a table, Excel sheet that kind of outlines what we are looking for and time frame regarding how long youth are staying in detention, and submitted that to youth service officers, juvenile court judges, whatever the case may be. I'm wondering how amenable people would be to keeping up with that data and providing that to us so that we can analyze it and then put all of our collective minds behind figuring out what to do and how to eliminate that, because that is a huge problem. So last thing real quickly I want to touch on is the act, the federal JJRA calls for a reduction or a plan, policies, and other things in place to eliminate the use of dangerous practices, unreasonable restraints, and here's where I want to spend the next 30 seconds to 45 seconds: unreasonable isolation. And so you know, or you may not know, you probably do because y'all on top of everything. But Tennessee enacted a statutory provision that became effective July the 1st of this year regarding the use of seclusion at juvenile detention facilities. And as at its essence, it says seclusion can only be used as a temporary response to behavior that threatens the immediate harm to a youth or others. Then the statute specifically states that seclusion can't be used for discipline, punishment, administrative convenience, retaliation, staffing shortages, or any other reason. And so when you hear that, two things should pop into your mind, or two questions. What's seclusion? I mean, how do you define that? And how long is temporary? And so seclusion, I'm not going to go through the whole definition, but it's basically involuntary segregation of a child. And then there's some exceptions. And then temporary according to Tennessee statute, is no more than 2 hours. So if you read the statute, it basically allows for seclusion up to 6 hours in 2-hour increments over a 24-hour period. The issue is that when the federal act talks about unreasonable isolation, same thing as seclusion basically, defines it almost the same way, but then it says that on a federal level, any instance in which a youth is confined alone for more than 15 minutes, and so there's this 2-hour. It's okay for the state to seclude for 2 hours or isolate for 2 hours, but the feds are saying 15 minutes, and so that is something that we'll be looking at and working on and trying to bridge that gap between those two. And so I've gone over 3 minutes, and I know Dr. Elion has some valuable information, so I'm going to stop right here and then ask if there's any questions that I can ask Vicky and Z to answer, or anything else I can shed light on.
Mr. Hargrove, is it possible to get that information? Because I'm really curious about that, the 24-hour period, what you were talking about with the temporary hours. I would really like to see that. Is it an actual act or is it a law or what?
Yeah, and so the state law is I'll get it to you. I think it's 37.5.214 is that's what I recall, but I'll make sure I'll look that up before I get off and put it in the chat.
Hey Craig, this is Amy. On your question about the reporting of the residents in detention centers who are waiting on placement, that should not be hard for any of us to do. We're already compiling all of that for our monitoring reports that we send in to Jerry every month. It's already there. So it'd just be real simple to highlight that or mark it in some way, or, you know, separate those numbers out. But yeah, it's already there. So it shouldn't be administratively difficult for any of us to do that.
That would be awesome. But I need to review is it quarterly that you're reporting that, or
monthly.
Every month? Monthly.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to review that monthly form, and I'll talk with Jerry and figure out a way to make it as painless as possible. Because I don't want to add any work, but that's something that's I think is a huge issue, and it needs to be addressed. Thank you, Amy.
Any other questions for Craig?
I was about to cut it off. Well, come on, man.
Thank you, Craig. I think you did good in front of your bosses.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gwen Wright, and I'm the Memphis Shelby County Regional Coordinator for the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth. One thing Dana wanted me to mention to you that the new compilations of selected laws will be arriving within the next month or so, so look for those. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Audrey Elion. She is the Special Assistant for Trauma-Informed Interventions for Juvenile Court of Memphis and Shelby County, where she also recently served as a supervisor for evaluation and referral. Dr. Elion serves as the Memphis Shelby County Regional Chair for the Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network, or TSPN, and was recently elected as the Vice Chair of the TSPN Advisory Council. She is a certified question, persuade, refer, or QPR trainer for the QPR Institute, as well as a Building Strong Brains Adverse Childhood Experiences trainer. Dr. Elion is the past president of both the Tennessee Counseling Association and the West Tennessee Counseling Association, and was a mental health clinician and school psychologist with Shelby County Schools for 9 years. So as you can see, she brings a wealth of knowledge and experience with her today. And one last thing before I turn it over to her, I learned something yesterday that I didn't know about her before she got married last month. So I know that you all want to join me in extending our best wishes for a long, happy, and prosperous marriage for her. Dr. Elion.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm wishing that as well. This is my first and hopefully last marriage, so this is awesome. Thank you, Gwen. Oh, thank you, Craig, too. You shed a lot of light on things, and some things I actually will touch on today. It's a wealth of information, you all, about trauma, okay, and what's going on in the juvenile justice system. So I'm going to condense it down, but I will leave time for questions at the end. Go ahead and see if I can share my screen. You all see the screen? Okay, I'm seeing yes in the chat. Okay, because I can barely see anything with this up. So, you all, today I'm going to present on current trauma-informed intervention trends in youth. So we're talking about primarily youth in the juvenile justice system, but I will also touch on youth and their interaction with the school system as well. First up, trauma. I always have to start off with the definition of trauma. So as you see here, any individual trauma results from an event, a series of events, or circumstances that are experienced, okay, by an individual. So this can be an adult or a child, as physically or emotionally harmful, life-threatening, and it has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning, whether it's mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual. And a lot of times people are saying, well, they've experienced this 10 years ago. How is this still affecting them now? But it does. And a lot of that has to do with the post-traumatic stress syndrome. But things happen to you as a child. It may not come up again until years later. Something may happen to trigger that. And once that's triggered, that emotion is triggered, that thought comes back to them, then they're actually dealing with the after effects of that. So, according to the DSM-5, exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or more of the following ways. So this is an extension of the trauma definition, but it says directly experiencing the traumatic event. So this has to do with anyone that's actually in an incident and they experience something traumatically. The second example is witnessing in person the traumatic event as it occurred. And you all can remember back to George Floyd's incident. The person was there that was filming. She watched it in person. So that's actually witnessing it in person. The next one example talks about learning that the traumatic event occurred. So a lot of times people will say, well, I wasn't actually there, so how can I be traumatized, or how can this really impact me? Well, sometimes just hearing about it. Sometimes we can hear about a person's death, or watch something on TV, or see something in a passerby as we're driving by an accident that we see on the interstate. Same thing. Those all play a role in how you may perceive trauma. And last, experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to adversive details of traumatic events. Sometimes just hearing it over and over and over again can cause people undue stress and trauma. Even talking about COVID, a lot of times people are seeing that on the news. They're seeing the numbers of deaths. I know some friends and I, we've stopped at certain times even watching the news. You have to, for your mental well-being, to just take a break, because sometimes it can be so overwhelming to just hear all of the negativity and all of the grief and loss that people are experiencing. So, just as a review, and I know a lot of you all have seen this, just to review the conventional ACEs, there are 10 of those, as you see on the left, and then the expanded ACEs that are brought to us by Building Strong Brains. You see those as witnessing violence, which we just talked about, living in an unsafe neighborhood. Any neighborhood can be unsafe, you all. As you saw, some of you may not have seen, but here in Memphis recently in our suburb, Collierville, we just had a shooting at our Kroger. So some people may say, well, now that area is unsafe. Living in the midst of COVID as a whole has made a lot of areas unsafe. Experiencing racism, living in the foster care system, or experiencing bullying. So out of all of those 15 different types of ACEs, you may have experienced one, more than one. I find it highly unlikely that you would have not experienced any, but that could possibly be the case. But this is what we're looking at with youth. A lot of our youth that are having contact with the juvenile justice system have experienced some forms of trauma. And not only the youth, but also their parents as well. So, one of the acts that came out in 2018 was the Juvenile Justice Reform Act. And like it said, it recognizes the role that trauma plays in the offending, rehabilitation, and the recidivism rates of the youth that we're seeing. The act has incorporated programs, though, to reduce the delinquency rate. So they're looking at alternatives to detention. And so we have a lot of programs that are going on statewide and nationwide that are trying to do whatever they can to address the issues of trauma in order to reduce the contact that youth have within our court system. And then last, you see the act also requires states to update their plans to include things for screenings of human trafficking, anything dealing with administrators, reentry, mental health, and behavioral health. So it's all inclusive. And all of this was under the Congress.gov 2017, just looking at everything that needs to take place in order to make sure that our youth have every opportunity to have services if they're experiencing any type of trauma. So, why are trauma interventions important? First off, well, we have to consider what's going on with the youth and try to change or update any interventions that we have, any policies that we're using. And so I know when Trauma Informed came out, everybody was thinking, okay, so how do we do this? How do we change our courts in order to address this? Sometimes it meant going back to the drawing board, figuring out what trauma is, educating our staff on it, and then learning what assessments need to be done and what changes need to be made throughout the court system in order to address it. Next up, most youth involved with juvenile justice have a history of childhood adversity, so some type of problems. And the more things that we learn about, that's how we can change and update policies to make sure that that's being addressed. And also work with community agencies and partners to see what they can do to assist our court in making sure that we're meeting the needs of the youth. When you're talking about trauma informed here in the state of Tennessee, a lot of the courts, and I know not all, but we have different assessments that we're using. So I think there are several courts now, I can't remember the exact number, but it's done through the Vanderbilt University, where we're utilizing the CANS, the JJ CANS, Juvenile Justice CANS, and that's Child and Strengths and Needs Assessment. And that assessment looks at youth who have high risk, low and medium risk for reoffending. It also looks at child sexual exploitation of a minor factors. It looks at suicide. It looks at trauma. And it takes all of those factors into account when trying to assess what services are needed for those youth. And then last, the adoption of a trauma-informed approach throughout the juvenile justice system. So being able to then share that information with the families and being able to connect them with mental health services throughout the community. And some of it may be mental health, some of it may be a mentor. Maybe this youth is dealing with a lot of issues, living in an unsafe environment, maybe gang related. To maybe possibly connect them with a group. And I know here in Memphis, we have 901 Block Squad that are comprised of people who have had some contact with gangs, and then they work with the youth and the gangs in order to make sure that those youth, in some cases, are able to safely get out of those gangs and find ways to work and do other things in the community so that they don't continue to have contact with the court system. So I think every court is different from what I've heard so far. We have several counties represented. So I think it's incumbent upon us to find out what services we have in our communities and then try to get those youth connected to those services. So there's a lot of research out there, sort of like what Craig said, some is good and some is not so good, okay? But it indicates that between 75 to 93% of our youth are exposed to multiple types of violence and traumatic events. Multiple, before they've even had contact with the juvenile court system. And a lot of times they're 3 times more, they have contact 3 times more likely when compared to other youth with adverse childhood experience. And then according to SAMHSA, trauma-informed care is evidence-based practice that teaches service providers and their organizations about how to better work with those youth. So it's not just about mental health centers right now, you all. It's also about juvenile. And it's because we're seeing a lot of these youth. We're seeing the impact that society has had on them, that their environment has had on them, that media has had on them, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But we're seeing all of these different things that's going on with the youth that we're trying to serve. Some of the effects that trauma has on children. There are so many different symptoms. So before I get started with that, I want to know from you all, and please feel free to type in the chat, what symptoms of trauma, or what are some of the symptoms of trauma? What do you think some of the symptoms are? And I'll give everybody a few minutes to sort of respond, because I know you see it every day. Even if it's not in the court, it may be in your family, it may be with your friends, but what are some of the symptoms of trauma? Ooh, I saw depression. So depression came up. Thank you, Erica. Anger. Thank you, Don. What else? Certain things are popping up on my screen and others are not. So any other symptoms you think may be included?
You've got anxiety, insomnia, crying, inability to focus.
These are good. Thank you for whoever is helping me verbally. I appreciate that.
Terry.
Oh, thank you, Jerry. But those are excellent examples. So I will say this: isolation may be a symptom of trauma, and Craig talked about that. That isolation could happen actually in detention. It could happen in their home. And you know, over this past year and a half, a lot of students were isolated to their home. They were unable to socialize with peers at school. So they were very isolated and withdrawn. Others may be hyperactive. They're very jittery. And it doesn't mean necessarily that they have ADHD, okay? It doesn't mean that they're attention deficit hyperactive disorder. It doesn't necessarily mean that. But they're just hyper. They're excited. They get rambunctious over certain things that have happened. It makes them nervous, so they have that nervous energy. Then we have aggression, which a lot of us do see. People are angry and depressed, and it comes out in physical ways. That anger, it eats at some. Some are able to express their anger appropriately, and others may not. And some examples may be of domestic violence, where you may have a youth that's upset with a parent. And I know we see this a lot. A youth is upset because the mom or dad took their cell phone, and then they lash back out at their parent. That anger is there. And it may just be that one-time incident, or it may be that the child is a victim of sexual abuse. And they've gotten to the point where they're fed up, or they're so mad that they're fighting back. So that could also be a part. Sadness, feeling depressed, very out of it. The trauma causes them to go inward and just feels like, there's no hope. Distraction, sometimes they're easily distracted. Sometimes they're fearful. If so much has happened to them, then their fearfulness it's normal. They're fearful of that person that may be victimizing them. If they're in a bullying situation and they're constantly being bullied or constantly being harassed, they're fearful. They're nervous. It may be difficult for them to develop rapport relationships with others. And moody. And what kid do you know that's not moody? Just a regular habit, a regular normal reaction. But when it's trauma involved, it could exacerbate that moodiness. Children exposed to violence are more likely to have behavior problems. Number one thing, we're seeing more and more behavior problems. Even since COVID and people have been returning to schools, the behavior problems, talking with our Shelby County school system here, they've seen an increase in the number of behavior problems. Poor school performance, problems with authority, and especially if there are no boundaries at home, or limited boundaries or limited structure, and then they're put in a setting where there is structure, which may be a school setting, or it may be in a detention center, unfortunately. Sometimes they're having problems with those in authority. It may be those police officers, whether it's the sheriffs or Memphis Police Department or any other police officers. It could just be a doctor. It could be a principal. It could be anyone who they feel is in a place of authority over them. They have difficulty following directions, more school absences, tardings, somatic complaints. We'll talk about that too. So difficulty sleeping, difficulty staying asleep or falling asleep, nightmares, and then fewer friends. Okay. So all of these things play a role, and looking at the trends of children is only getting more severe, I would say. We're seeing more incidents of it. So a lot of times with ACEs, we always say, instead of saying what's wrong with you, we say what's happened to you. But on the other side, we can also say, how are you feeling? And this is like a scale that I was able to find, and I was really happy about this because it shows the behavior on one side, but then it shows on the other what feeling is it actually masking? What is it hiding? So that oppositional behavior that we may see with some of the youth that are coming in, sometimes they're really feeling that fear of rejection or abandonment. Those outbursts that they're having, they could feel overwhelmed. And so when someone is overwhelmed, even with us as adults, how do you respond? And that's a rhetorical question. I want you to think, when you're in a situation where things are just becoming overwhelming to you, what do you do? That anger that they're exhibiting could really mean that they're hurting. And the only way that they can express it is through anger. And we see that a lot in the research looking at young males, where a lot of times if they're hurting or depressed, instead of crying a lot of times or going inward, sometimes they express that hurt through anger or through aggressive ways. That behavior of depression Sometimes they feel lack of self-worth, like they're not important, like they're not valued. Withdrawal or absences from school or work could mean avoidance of emotions. They sort of back away from others to avoid the hurt or whatever they're experiencing. Argumentativeness. Now we know with teenagers, with young adults, and with us, sometimes we argue. They want to get their point across. They want to feel valued. And sometimes that's masking that relationship. They're trying to see where they stand with that other person. So it does test that relationship with others. Next up, escalate. You know how some kids go from 0 to 10. It's like it's not a gradual, it's just automatically up there. Sometimes there's triggered trauma memories. Sometimes those memories come back up and they could be in a totally different situation, talking to someone that had nothing to do with that particular trauma, but something they said triggered that thought and that reaction. And then their emotional level, behavioral level goes all the way up. And then last, defiance of authority, maybe participating or doing things, delinquent acts. It's a need for control. And it's not to say that this is okay for youth to do any of the delinquent acts that they're doing. Don't get me wrong. But it's just showing that sometimes they need to feel in control. Or they're trying to provide a need. So if this person is constantly going out stealing, why is this youth stealing? Is it because they're not being provided with the things that they need at home? Something may be missing, or they may be neglected in some way. So therefore they choose to do this as their way to survive. So it varies from child to child or from youth to youth. So that's something I think is us as advocates to sort of see what is really going on with this youth and how can I better provide services for them. How do we think about that when we're developing our strategies, interventions, and policies and procedures when working with those youth in the juvenile justice system? So, facts about trauma. Sometimes research has shown it can come and go. So the trauma is there, but it doesn't mean that the child is constantly thinking about it. But it can come back and forth depending on what has happened. And it can be re-triggered, like it says here, by smell. It could be a person's cologne of a person that has violated them in some way, and just the smell triggers that reaction. It could be a sound, just like when you hear of military and they may hear a car backfire. It may put them back in the war zone where they thought that they were right back in their moment. Well, with some of the kids that I've spoken to doing presentations and also over in detention, they say anytime they hear any loud noise or gunfire, with one of the youth that I talked to, he said it reminded him of when his cousin was shot to death in front of him. So for him, just the sound of gunfire or any popping sound sends him right back to that thought. And how he saw his cousin laying there on the ground in front of him. So different things can happen to a youth to put them into those situations where they feel like they're re-traumatized or dealing with those things. So getting back to that, thinking about the effects of COVID, which I think has affected all of us in numerous ways. But specifically within the juvenile justice system, I think it's affected each one of our courts. And each one of you can talk about that. I think with our court, it caused us to shut down for a period of time. It did. And so youth, working with the police departments, youth were not as arrested as often. It depended on what the arrest was for, whether it was a felony or whether it was a misdemeanor, as opposed to whether or not they were put into detention. We were unable to, as our youth service officers, so we call ours juvenile service officers, were able to go and meet with the youth in detention like we were before, and having that one-on-one personal contact with the youth. Youth may experience adversities and trauma, including the fear of illness or death of oneself or loved ones. When COVID hit, they were afraid. If we had any youth, I think they were tested too before they came in. And so if any youth were known to have COVID, that they were not allowed to come into detention, they had to be medically cleared. That's my understanding, but I think every court was different. So that's something for you to sort of think about. What are your guidelines now? Our things are held over by our sheriff's department. They're responsible for the youth that are in the detention center. So they had to come up with different strategies and policies based upon COVID and keeping them safe. Detained youth may have lost contact with family members or access to social supports. So when a youth is in detention, yeah, they may not have access to their friends and loved ones. Families may or may not come in, or what we had to do, we had them calling their relatives, and then we began Zoom. So they were able to actually see if the families had Zoom capabilities. So it was different things and practices put in place in order to address that, to reduce the amount of trauma that youth were dealing with while they were in the detention center. Youth under community supervision may experience disruption to life. So employment, graduations, you know that these youth went through a lot. Some were up for graduation or were unable to graduate or go to the prom, and then they were not able to be with their classmates in school. Some did not have those laptops that were needed in order to actually be in the school setting because of Wi-Fi and internet difficulties that they were experiencing. Probation officers, it was hard to do those in-person visits. You had kids on electronic monitoring. So it impacted, I know, many of our courts in so many different ways. And then last, staff serving the youth. We face challenges. We're dealing with family members that are surviving day by day, either by having COVID, some we've lost by COVID, co-workers we've lost from COVID, and natural causes as well. But it was a lot with us having to work from home part-time instead of having in-person meetings, doing Zoom. And I sort of want to hear from you all. How did it impact your particular courts? How did COVID affect your working environment? And I'll wait a few minutes just for you all to share. Jerry, if you could help me, that would be awesome.
Nothing in the chat yet. I'm also posting that CDC report since you mentioned deaths during the effects of COVID. There was a journal article out this week with the CDC that reported over 140,000 children have been orphaned due to COVID, with 65% of those being minorities. And I have the link in the chat in just a second. Dawn said we were not able to have court for a while, which backed up the docket.
Definitely, Dawn. I think that happened to a lot of us. And so cases were prolonged over or reset for a period of time, definitely.
Andrea also says less in-person contact with kids. And Kimberly says doing meetings virtually instead of in person.
Then someone said they were quarantined, Jerry.
Also time out of the office because of quarantine for exposure, yes.
And that's it. So you all, it impacted not just the youth, but us. But imagine how they're feeling with all of this going on and not knowing what's happening outside. who's going to be there when they are released from detention. All of those things played a role. So the role of social media, you all, I could talk about this forever. I know you all know, but they talk about as far as what's happening with youth. This is a major thing that social media platforms, they think serve as a major conduit to these delinquent acts or the increase of delinquent acts that we're seeing in our youth. Sometimes it's the perpetuation of delinquent acts, even looking at things that we've seen here at our court and also working with the school system. Sometimes youth who are wanting to hurt or have a fight that day, they will post it online so that people know where in the school they're going to be when this incident happens, or where in the community they're going to be when these things happen. So those things are definitely there. Cyberbullying increased a lot during COVID because youth were in front of the computer throughout the day. They had access to their cell phones throughout the day. They were able to see criminal activity on social media, gang violence on social media all day. And this is not just Facebook, Instagram, this is television. And then the advancement of technology has led to a greater access to firearms and harmful explosives, you all. So kids have more access to these guns. They're not taught how to use these guns. They're not even supposed to have guns. But then they're participating in delinquent acts where they're doing aggravated robberies, assaults. They're threatening. And then we have a lot of attempted murders and murders. And sometimes the innocent person is the one that's being shot. It's not even sometimes the intended person that's being shot. It's actually a passerby or a family member that may just happen to be close to that actual person. And then last, it says research suggests that their exposure to media violence plays a rather significant role in the formation and escalation of violent behavior. And this is over time. So sometimes social media can be good, but if it's constant and we're not setting up barriers to that or parental controls around the amount that they're seeing, even as far as the news. Sometimes, like we said, even witnessing it or watching it vicariously, you can still be traumatized by some of the things that you're seeing or want to carry out what you're seeing. So social media may affect you psychologically or emotionally, looking at self-esteem issues, depression issues, anxiety, we're seeing so much on there. Suicide, it has impacted our suicide rates, you all. And just talking about suicide as a whole, the number of suicides have increased over time, but also what's increased is the amount of help that's out there and the amount of calls that we've seen nationwide to the crisis center, the suicide prevention hotlines, and people trying to get access and help for either themselves or someone that they're concerned about that may be suicidal. So that's a positive. That's something that's happening, that the information is out there. We have callers available to answer those calls. But even looking at the suicide rates for youth that are incarcerated are higher than those in the general community. It's higher than those in the general community. So you're thinking about that because now their youth is isolated. Now their youth is withdrawn from friends. Now their youth is anxious. They're thinking about everything that's happening. They may still be angry. They're dealing with different emotions. And then they may have those suicidal thoughts. And then something else that's current, we're looking at youth with LGBT and Q issues. We have a lot of youth that are exploring their identity or having different identity stages, and then they're coming into contact with the juvenile court system. How are those youth being treated? Are they accepted? What's happening to them in their community? Are we aware of what the pronouns are when working with those youth that may be in our detention centers? Those are things to think about, and how social media may have an effect, but just thinking about what things we have to start thinking about and incorporating in our policies to make sure that we're doing everything we can to meet the needs of these youth. Physical factors we talked about earlier, sleep issues, health issues. Sometimes youth that are dealing with a lot of stress. I did a presentation recently for a nursing association here in Memphis, and they talked about the increase in stomach problems that youth were presenting with, anxiety problems, headaches, stress levels. All of those have increased since COVID started. External factors, homelessness. You all, we have a lot of people that have been out of their homes because their families do not have the money to provide for them at this time. They've lost jobs. And so there are a lot of kids that are homeless. So you may want to contact your school system. I know here in Memphis, our school system has a homeless department that works with the youth and the families to get them services within the community, and also to assist them while they're in school and they may not have a place to stay. And then the last, social interactions, withdrawn, vulnerable to be a target for human trafficking. You all, just listening to the TBI and listening to different reports that I'm getting from Restore Court here, that's our human trafficking group that we work with, they talk about that. They said that the numbers have somewhat increased a little bit because now the youth are on media a lot. And so they're vulnerable to pedophiles and different people that are trying to get them to participate in things. Or the youth is running away from home very often. And sometimes we may have those youth that have contact with the court. They may be in for theft of property, but what if they were in a hotel room when their property was stolen? And we're finding out later that the youth that we thought may have been, just stealing something was actually a victim, and was actually have someone, a pimp or a parent, some cases, that are actually helping them and making them sell their bodies or give their bodies away. So those are things to sort of think about. What things can we do for to try to address those issues dealing with the trauma? Now, I'm bringing this in because I was talking about schools. So one thing that the schools are doing, a lot of them, they have this Pbis, as you can see here on the side, positive behavioral interventions and support. So this is their procedural way of addressing the issues that they're seeing in the school system. And I have up quickly, and I realize the time, but trauma-informed schools. So it's just to say that now they're acknowledging the presence of traumatic occurrences in the student lives, and then they're trying to identify which students need help, and then try to connect them to those services. So I think throughout the state, people are either referring out to agencies. I know here in Shelby County, we have a mental health center within the school system where they have social workers and psychologists that go out to the individual schools that are a part of Shelby County schools, and they actually provide counseling services for them, also dealing with drugs and alcohol as well. So mental health and drug and alcohol counseling. Now, research suggests, this is part that doesn't always look good, but it says children in juvenile justice probably have experienced trauma. They said that the current juvenile system does not meet the needs of the youth who have experienced trauma. But you all, it's something we're addressing. We're getting better at it. It's something we've never had to address before. And so now I think courts are doing more and more trying to address it as best we can. So there is hope, you all. There is hope. Research affirms that certain types of supports are especially likely to help the youth thrive. And this is what we're doing. we're doing different programs now that we are utilizing with the youth in order to address the issues that they're facing. It says a number of evidence-based interventions and approaches can mitigate the negative effects of trauma. That's why we have the CAN. Some people were using the CPSS, we're using the CASI. There are other different forms of assessments. These are child assessments that look at trauma, mental health, alcohol and substance abuse, different things that we can then refer to an outside agency and say, hey, this youth is experiencing trauma, these types of trauma. They've also reported to us that they're dealing with alcohol and substance abuse. You know, what services does your organization have that can better help these youth? And then finding ways, 8 ways that JJ administrators can promote resilience. You all develop clear and comprehensive policies and procedures. Establish them. Limit detention or institutionalization only to youth who pose considerable risk. And I think we're doing that, but also to Craig's thing, how long are we keeping these youth in detention? What are we doing to minimize that amount of time and to get the cases heard? We know that since COVID, like some of you said, the dockets got backed up, but now the courts are opening back up. We're able to do Zoom conferences now. We're able to do Zoom via court. So therefore, we can now start addressing these things so that way you won't stay in detention as long. We also need to develop and implement different plans among our staff and leaders. One thing that I do here in Shelby County is I train. I offer yearly trainings in trauma and different mental health issues, suicide prevention. We have different things. We bring in the school system to talk about their homeless programs. We bring in other organizations, Restore Corps, to talk about human trafficking and ways that we can address that and identify that while the youth is here and has contact with the court. So these are ways that we are working together. So you all, it's not a negative thing. This is mostly to inform you, but letting you know we're making strides. And I don't think that all the time the court system gets props for doing some of the positives that we're doing. The media sometimes focuses on the negative, but I think it's incumbent upon us to focus on what we're doing well and what strides we're making, because we are making a difference in youth lives. Then that's my time, you all. Are there any questions? And my contact information is listed, so feel free to email me and or call if you have any additional questions.
Are there any questions for Dr. Elion, Jerry, that you saw in the chat, or if anybody would like to speak up?
None in
Well,
the chat so far.
None
in the chat so far.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Elion, for that wonderful presentation and all that good information. We appreciate you being with us today, and we invite you to come to every YSO roundtable. We do it quarterly.
I would love to attend. Thank you, Dana.
I have one question. Can you please post your contact information in the chat, Dr. Elion, for everyone? And we can share her presentation as well as all the other shares that we'll have today in the follow-up email that we usually send out after it.
And just a reminder, I know we've had some people to join us. So if you all would be kind enough to put your email address, name and email address in the chat box, we would appreciate that. So moving down the agenda, our next presenter is Michelle Cash, and Michelle is with the Department of Children's Services and in the CPS, Child Protective Services Division. And I've had the opportunity to know Michelle for many, many years, and on your agenda, it says Christy Espy will also be here, but she had an opportunity to take a day off, so she's not here today. And but Michelle's going to talk to the group.
She's enjoying some R&R.
Yeah, Michelle's going to talk to the group, and some of y'all may know, and some of you may not know, but there has been a new redesign around Child Protective Services, CPS, and that has rolled out with a new organizational chart and all that. And Michelle was kind enough to send us the organizational chart, which will go out with all the supporting documents. But we just felt that the courts, it was real important for them to understand and hear the information about how that redesign could possibly affect the courts or have some impact on them. Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Right, thank you. As Dana said, I'm Michelle Cash, and I'm one of the team coordinators for CPS in the Northwest region. I am a team coordinator for the Family Protection and Preservation. What they did, they took CPS many years ago. I've been around for a long time, so I've kind of seen things come full circle. Back in around, at least for our region in 2013, we had a reorganization where we had our investigation cases and our assessment cases, as they were called at that point. There had been a redesign where the investigation cases were moved under the Office of Safety and Central Office. The assessment cases remained under the region, like under the guidance of our regional administrators. What they did was take a look at what CPS was doing, really wanted to look at a more robust approach to the child protection and the prevention itself. They took into account the Families First Act that rolled this summer, so it is in line with that as well. But one of the key focuses was the physical abuse piece. Wanted to really look at that piece with a sense of urgency for those more vulnerable children. And I know for you guys, when I think of our juvenile justice, sometimes we have those CPS cases for our JJ kids too. So, and when I see that, sometimes I think we may have had a missed opportunity somewhere along the line as they've been growing up. But I know that we all see, and deal with a lot of the same children. One of the things that we looked at, that Central Office spent a lot of time being very sensitive and thoughtful in the approach, was looking at the response times. For those of you, if you're not familiar with Child Protective Services, when we get a referral, we have a certain amount of time that we have to respond to ensure safety. We have 3 priorities. We have a priority 1, which means it's usually a drop and run situation. We've got to see those child victims within 24 hours. We have a priority 2, which is 2 business days. And then a priority 3 is 3 business days. But what they wanted to look at, and it is a big piece of the redesign, is the physical abuse allegation. So what they did for children 8 and under, we have a PAIR team, which is a physical abuse immediate response. For kids 8 and under, depending on who the referent is, if it's a physical abuse allegation, we have 4 hours to respond. So it's super quick. It has to meet the criteria for the PAIR, but those referrals would come from mental health professionals, medical professionals, school education, and childcare personnel. So it does have to meet certain criteria. So that is one piece of our redesign. The other piece is our SIPIT cases, which is the cases that are worked with law enforcement. They are severe abuse. Those are cases where they may be child deaths. It may be something where someone can get charged. So we have SIPIT payer teams throughout our regions, and they deal with strictly those types of cases. And then we have the FPP, which is the Family Protection and Preservation piece, that deal with all of the other cases. They may be your non-severe, anything that prior to the redesign would have been a non-severe investigation would also come to our teams. Not to say that we don't end up with some severe abuse cases for our drug exposed kids if they're testing positive for meth and illicit drugs such as that at the hand of being exposed by their parents. We do still, work those cases. But as far as the FPP piece, it is very service driven. It is still dealing with safety. We are looking at the close relations across the board with courts, schools, or, medical professionals and anybody in our community because we all see a lot of the same children. So that's a big piece of the redesign, is really having those community connections, working very closely with our SIPIT partners. SIPIT is stands for, if I can remember what it is now, Child Protection Investigative Team. And it is a multidisciplinary team that consists of medical professionals, school, mental health, law enforcement, and they have meetings for those severe abuse cases to determine outcomes as far as whether that case is substantiated or not. One of the things that they did as well, we had redesigns of what our county looked like as far as the makeup and who supervises what county. The org chart was provided to kind of give you an idea. It does include Northwest and Southwest. Northwest goes from Dyer County to Dixon. So in order to meet that 4-hour response for our new pair cases, they really had to look at, fixing these counties where that's doable. Another thing that we look at, everybody is a reporter. Everybody's a mandatory reporter as far as calling in if you suspect abuse or neglect. Please do not hesitate to call the hotline. I will give you that number. I can put it in the chat box at the end. But it is 1-877-237-0004. And they will ask you a series of questions. It's very helpful if you have as much information, identifying information for the family so that we can actually locate them. That is very helpful. But please do not hesitate. If you have situations where you're not sure, feel free to reach out to us. Even if we're not in your region, you can still reach out to us and we can guide you on, we feel like that might need to be called in, or I think this is, something else. What they did with the redesign, they started in Shelby County. There are multiple specialized teams. For our region, we only have at this point the FPP and the SIPIT payer teams. Now, Shelby County with the rollout, they have, there's a triage team, rapid response, they have drug teams. They were able to have the whole kit and caboodle, so to speak. We're not fortunate enough at this point to have the staff to have all of the specialized teams, but we hope to in years to come. Another thing that the redesign does, it puts all of CPS underneath the Office of Safety, which is very helpful. One thing that staff have been able to have is a lot of specialized trainings. One thing that has been a big focus is our domestic violence cases. There have been some really good domestic violence trainings and mandatory trainings for our staff. to assist them in working those types of cases. They have actually made domestic violence as an allegation itself. So that is also something new. One of the things with the redesign, because of course we do have people on call every day, every night, 24/7. We have combined our on call for both of our program areas so that our workers who maybe are not as comfortable doing and dealing with a sex abuse or a severe abuse case, they are having an opportunity to get mentored if they're getting called after hours on cases like that. There's also specialized trainings that they have been able to be in. So not only helping coach them, but they're also having the ability for professional development during this process. So there has been a big focus of training, making sure that everybody has everything they need, the tool sets to respond to all varying types of cases. I'm going to see if there was anything else I could tell you about the payer. We still have the centralized hotline, which is in Nashville, that takes all of the referrals for our counties in Tennessee. They determine whether it meets the screening criteria, meets the definition of abuse or neglect, and then they send it down to the region. Each region has a reader who gets all of the referrals and then views and screens them and sends them out to the county, to the appropriate county, at which point they get assigned and the team leaders and the workers start dealing with those cases. Those are basically the high points of the redesign. Again, it did move everyone who was under the region through assessments, moved us under the Office of Safety. Again, they were very thoughtful in the process. Everyone had an opportunity to have an interview before the actual rollout of the redesign to kind of see what their interest was, you know, what was their preference as far as the severe or non-severe tracks, and, you know, seeing where their strengths were. And then once everyone had their CPS discussion, there was a actual meeting where it was a team reveal, where all of the teams were revealed. And for at least our region in Northwest, about 90% were able to get their first choice of where they wanted. So they were looking very thoughtfully at how staff would feel, you know, trying to create as least amount of disruption for our families, our workers, our community partners, all of those things. Do you guys have any questions as far as the redesign and purpose itself? One thing I did want to bring up is that if there are ever any concerns, I know sometimes we have cases, you know, for JJ and CPS at the same time, or someone has questions about CPS or a complaint or a concern or whatever that might look like. One of the things that the ask is that you guys reach out to us. Mary Beth Duke is our Executive Director for Northwest and Southwest. Even if it's questions outside of our region, we can guide you to who that contact person is, and I can put all of our numbers in the chat box for you guys. I know sometimes that the regional administrators get called about CPS cases, and they may or may not be familiar with that. So we just want to make sure that everybody's got the correct contact when they make that first phone call, if there's concerns or anything like that with CPS cases. But I can put all of that in the chat box for you guys. Dana, do you have any questions? Trying to think if I left anything out.
I do not. That was a good overview. I know it's a little more complicated than all of that, but
It is. That was a quick
and I know
overview.
y'all are still learning too. I mean, you know, as you go along. Jerry, are there any in the chat?
No, not any. If you
One of
have
the
questions,
things,
you can still put them in the chat and we can catch them as we go along.
right.
But
One
if
of the things that they are doing with the redesign, they are looking at caseloads, number of referrals that are coming in, looking at any areas that maybe need to be, you know, tracked and adjusted a little differently, because it is new. It is different. It is new. And, you know, we're looking very, I mean, they are having so many training opportunities for specialized trainings to just really try to give everybody the skill set, and really trying to work closely with new hires, you know, for staff retention measures, just to, you know, because it's hard. All of these jobs are very hard. And, you know, you really have to have a heart to want to do this, because there's certainly easier things out there, as we all know. So they're really being considerate in how the approach has been, which is something that I was very grateful for, because, you know, for people who have been under the region, there was, you know, some anxiety and, you know, what's going to happen and those kind of things. But I think everybody worked really good together to make that transition successful, so that we're not leaving any families or children unsafe.
Are there any questions? Anybody want to just use their mic and just ask a question? You don't have to put it in the chat. Well, hearing none, thank you so much, Michelle. We appreciate all the information. And like I said, Michelle yesterday shared the organizational chart that would include rural West Tennessee. And so we will send that out with the documents, and she's going to put her immediate information in the chat so that you can have access to that as well. So thank you again, Michelle.
Christy Espy is the team coordinator in Northwest for the severe abuse teams, and she also has one of the FPP teams, and then I have the remainder of the FPPs. But I will put all of our information into the chat box. That way, if you have a community partner that reaches out to you about a CPS case in Northwest or anywhere, either Mary Beth, myself, or Christy, we will find out who that contact person is, if you guys will just reach out to us.
We did have one question from Dr. Elion. Do you know who the coordinator for the Memphis Shelby County area is?
There had been some changes just recently in Shelby County. I believe their director, we just had a meeting yesterday. Let me flip through my notes. The new director for Shelby County is LaTasha Sloan.
Thank you. I knew about that, Michelle. That's why I said I don't know who that person is now.
Yeah, because Deshaun Harris used to be the director, and now he is an executive director.
Oh, okay. So
he is now the executive director for the West. So that would include Shelby, Northwest, and Southwest.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Michelle.
A long way too. See what I'm sorry.
I said, thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming on and sharing. And you're welcome to stay on, or if you've got something very pressing, we understand that as well.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate you asking us to do it. I hate that Christy wasn't here. I did ask her if she had anything that she wanted me to talk about, but But she's in vacation mode, and I certainly understand that.
Absolutely.
But if you guys have questions or anything, please reach out to us. We are very responsive, and if we don't know answers, we will find them for you. And I will put all of our contact information in the chat box.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. I'm going to put myself on video because
we're going to continue with our DCS folks kind of at the other end of the spectrum, and that's our independent living. And we have Erica Sheffield and Kimberly Smith, and who do a phenomenal job. And we get to work, Jerry and I get to work with them through the Citizens Review Panel. And, it's always interesting to see and hear from the work that they do, as well as Katie Taylor. What's her other name? Katie Taylor Smith?
Patty.
And so Kimberly and Erica are with us today and going to talk about independent living. And thank both of you for being here.
Thank you. I think we've got a tip sheet, Miss Jerry. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Just give me just a second.
Okay. Thank you.
And you might not be able to see the screen, so you might want to look at your own Word document.
Okay. I didn't know if everyone
Unless
else
you
could see
have
it or not.
2020.
No. Okay. I didn't know if everyone else could see it because it's really small on my screen. But like I said, my name is Kimberly Smith, and I'm one of the independent living program specialists with DCS. I work all of the Southwest region, and I share 2 counties, Wayne and Perry, in South Central. And what Eric and I are going to be discussing today is what services independent living can offer our young people that are also social services and our JJ youth. So that first one, custodial youth that are placed in a community setting, we can offer independent living IL wraparound services. What that service is, that is providing funding to our young people to normalize their experiences while they're in foster care. That could include assistance with extracurricular activities, high school graduation packages, proms, senior yearbooks, senior trips, things of that nature. We also offer life skills instructions. Prior to COVID, we used to meet at least during spring break and fall break and offer services for our young people regarding life skills. We would have community providers come out, speak to our young children about housing, budgeting, education, the college enrollment and process, insurance, anything pertaining to life skills. And those young people would be able to receive a small stipend for attending those classes. They're also eligible for the education and training vouchers, the ETV, and the Bright Future scholarships. That's for young people ages 16 to 19 that are placed in that community setting and attending a post-secondary education program. For custodial youth ages 14 to 19 that are placed in that secure facility, those are our JJ youth. Those secure facilities are the YDCs and the detention centers. We offer the same life skills instructions for them, and we also offer what's called the Bright Future Scholarship from the ages of 16 and 19. And that scholarship is up to $2,500 a semester, up to $5,000 a year towards their education. The schools must be public schools and not private institutions for that funding. Any questions about that thus far? Okay. The next bullet points, 3, 4, and 5, they kind of all go together. Those are for our extension of foster care youth, okay? So extension of foster care youth that are attending a high school or a high set from the ages of 18 to 21, and they're not placed in that hardware secure facility, they can still continue to receive foster care placement services. Those are those young people that want to remain in a resource home and complete their education. Or they can receive what's called an independent living allowance. That is for young people that want to live independently. That could be in a college dorm, it could be living with family, it could be living with friends, or out in their own apartment. The independent living allowance is a little bit over $400 a month that they would receive from the state as long as they're in school and maintaining the requirements for extension of foster care. We also offer case management services for those young people. Most of you all probably know that we've contracted with youth villages, and they provide that case management piece for our young people, and they have to meet with them at least once a month. Same life skills instructions and the independent living wraparound services are available to them. They're eligible for a little bit of, I guess you could call it, extra funding. If they need assistance with housing deposits, utility deposits, car insurance deposits, car repairs, we can assist those young people in extension of foster care in those areas as well. Then we have our young adults that are from the ages of 18 to 21 that are already enrolled in a post-secondary education program or vocational program. We can assist them as well. Of course, they cannot turn 18 in that secure facility. They can receive the ETV funding. We could pay up to $6,000 a semester, up to $12,000 a year for that population. They can receive that money up until the age of 23. They can still remain in that resource home, or they can live independently. They will receive that case management service through youth villages, the independent living wraparound services, and life skills instructions. And just to back up, that Bright Future Scholarship, that ends at the age of 24. Okay, so they can receive that funding. Number
And
5.
Kim,
Yes,
if
ma'am.
you don't mind before that, because I know on our tip sheet, we have 5,000 per year, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic act, we are expanding that to 12,000 a year until we are able to say that is no longer available. So that's where she get 12,000, but it's usually 5,000 per year. But due to this pandemic, we are able to expand that 5,000 to 12,000.
Yes, thank you, Erica. Number 5, we don't have a lot of those young people, but these are young people from the ages of 18 to 21 who are unable to attend school due to serious health issues. But they're also allotted the same services as far as the foster care placement, the independent living allowance, case management services and court reviews, life skills instructions, and independent living wraparound services. We also utilize extension of foster care as a bridge for those young people that are intellectually delayed, and we refer them to our Employment Community First program, which was formerly known as our DIDS program, or adult mental health supports. Most of those young people are in need of housing that access that service. And one of the housing options that we have for young people that have severe mental health issues would be Project Transition. So we try and make those referrals for those young people as well. Eric is going to discuss the remaining tip sheet, but any questions about extension of foster care, scholarships? Okay, thank you.
Okay, and just to break it down, the education piece that Ms. Kim was talking about, we do have funds available to our young people who exit state custody at the age of 16 older for adoption or subsidized permanent guardianship. So therefore, even though they are no longer in custody at the age of 16 or older, they can come back and ask for service when they are ready to attend a post-secondary program. Still, the funds the amount of the funds are still available to them as well. And the adoption group is also limited to the IL wraparound funds that we provide to our young people who are in custody, such as, like Kim said, yearbook, graduation items and stuff. So they will still be eligible for those items, even though they are no longer in DCS care, as long as they was adopted or SPG at the age of 16. As far as education training voucher, like Kim said, it goes to age 23, but they have to be in a great satisfaction progress at age 21 in order to maintain those education assistance till their 23rd birthday. Bright Future Scholarship is more broken down who will be eligible for. So youth who exit to permanency at age 16 or older, they are eligible. So again, they are no longer involved with DCS, but they will have to contact us to get those funds set up for them toward their post-secondary. Youth who have exited state custody from a YDC, Youth Development Center, or detention at the age of 16, they are eligible for these Bright Future scholarships as well. As like Kim said, they must go to a state school, a public school, not a private school. And youth who are in a YDC or detention who are attending, so if they have completed their high school requirements and they are coming to custody at the age of 18, we do have that, and they finish high school, but they want to complete their post-secondary education program, we can help them while they are sitting in YDC or detention to finish their post-secondary program until they are able to be released from DCS. And also the young people who lose the eligibility for education training voucher, which we call ETV, if they go to a school, if they attend a state school, they will be eligible to request Bright Future scholarship for one semester in order to assist them to bring their GPA up. So how they lose their eligibility is falling below a 2.0 both semesters, the fall semester, spring semester, and we try to give them a third try to bring their GPA up. If they are in a state school, we can use Bright Future scholarship to help them with that last opportunity to bring the GPA up. Again, like Kim said, we have contracted with youth villages to provide additional support service beside the case manager for extension of foster care. They also are providing life set service to our young people. And this pretty much is a life skill component of the service that they are providing. They meet with the young people once a week for life set service. So whatever the goal that the young people are working toward, youth villages staff would assist the young people in reaching that goal. So if they want to fill out an application to obtain employment, you know, the life skill component would be toward that, helping them obtain employment. And whatever other goals, getting enrolled in school, they will help them with the process. So we have add addition criteria that these service is available to. So it used to be the ones who age out of foster care, are the ones who 14 older in foster care. So now it's available to any youth or young adult that is 16 up to 23. And then, like I said, the ones who are active enrolled in extension of foster care, they have a choice to receive extension of foster care service and life set. Then we have the one who is out of state custody at the age 18 that was in a foster care placement. And then for the ones who has been adopted at any age, it does not have to be 16 or older for life set. It could be any age and they are needing assistance. We can make a referral for them to receive life set service. Youth who are 16 or older currently are previously placed in a youth development center, they can receive life set service where they was not able to at the beginning, but now they are. So that's the additional service that we have added to making sure we really serve the JJ population. Young adults who are exit or were previously in state custody and in foster care at any time at the age of 16 or older, of course, they will continue to receive service. And that was one of the population that we were serving. So we have at the adoption and the JJ population where they are able to receive life-saving service to up to age 23. And we have 3 IL program coordinators for for the state. I cover the West Tennessee along with Tennessee Valley. Then we have one for middle, and then we have one for region. And all of us review these referrals to make sure these young people are eligible for life-saving services. Number 8, Jim Casey Resource Centers. We have in the pretty much in the major 4 city of Tennessee. So we have one in Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, and Chattanooga. And these services where they go in again to build their employment skills, life skills, or if they needing housing assistance, these resources should be available to assist these young people. So anybody who have been in foster care at the age of 14 through 19, or youth who exit DCS custody at or after 14, these services will be available to them 14 through 26. Unfortunately, like I said, it's just in the 4 major cities of the state. But if we have for example, if we have a Southwest child that is placed in Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, Chattanooga, they can utilize. So it's not only for these city and youth in these cities. So anybody in those particular areas can use these resource centers. Again, like I said, it's up to 26. They will be able to provide whatever needs that the young people is needing. And then last, I want to say that, you know, along with all of this service that we provide to our young people, we also make sure that every youth that is 14, 16 to come in DCS custody have an independent living plan. So we are trying to help them build their life skills. And then every child that is 17 and older, we recommend that a child family team be held to develop a transition plan, in which I call a roadmap. So when they leave DCS custody, they will have all this information about how to reapply for a birth certificate, how to apply for a social security card. It's just like a roadmap for them when they leave. So it's really compiled with resources and service for these young people. If they do not have any support, they would know where to seek out for these services. So pretty much you will see that my team and the independent living office, we work with a broad range of ages for our young people that was in custody or are currently in custody. And that's all I have. Is there any questions?
If y'all will notice, Kimberly did put in this IL specialist for Shelby and Northwest as well, if y'all didn't know. And I'm sure Erica and Kimberly can get y'all in touch with them if you need to. Thank y'all for joining us today. I miss seeing both of your faces in person so much. I get to hear Eric every once in a while on a CAB meeting or Kimberly on other calls, but I don't get to see them as much anymore since we're still quarantining and things. But thank y'all for joining us this morning. So, oh, and also if you notice, the sheet that Kimberly and Erica shared was already in your email earlier, and I'll resend it when I send the follow-up as well. So you'll get it again. Thank y'all though. Thank y'all so much. Following our agenda, we have next Amy. Everybody knows Amy Jones is with us, and she's going to talk about the Jim Henry Center for Children and Families proposal that's come up. You're up, Amy.
All right. So I wish that I had some big, great announcement to make about this today, but we were supposed to get a decision from the state for sure on the funding. However, we got preempted because there was some little announcement about a Ford place going out over here in West Tennessee. And so we kind of got preempted by all of that. But just to kind of give you a background on what the Jim Henry Center might be if we can get it funded. We have noticed in the last few years in Madison County, and I can't imagine that anything is that different in at least rural West counties, because we tend to mirror each other, just a different scale. But the trend towards getting younger and younger clients through delinquency matters. So, you know, there was a time when we would have all been shocked to see a petition come in charging a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old child with something violent. And unfortunately, it's not that unusual anymore. And we're seeing those numbers grow for these really young kids coming in. And not just the ones that come in on really serious charges, but those children that you've seen 3, 4, 5, 6 delinquent charges on, and they're not even 12, 13, 14 years old yet. So the really serious, we've been calling them the emerging offenders, I think, for lack of a better term. And we had been talking for a long time. What can we do about this? We've got to have some way to head off. We got to start treating this like an emergency. When we start to see these very young children coming in with serious charges, or coming in becoming frequent flyers when they're not even at, middle school yet. So we had been looking for a long time for what we could possibly do about that. And our judge convened a group of people who had some expertise in that area, and some of y'all were part of that group. And what it came down to, but when we looked at all of our data, I'll share one more part of the data that was really, really impactful for me. We looked at all of the kids that we'd transferred to adult court in the last 10 years. So there were about 80 people who had been transferred from juvenile to adult court in that period of time. 2 we dropped from the sample because we didn't have sufficient data on them. So out of 78 young people who were transferred over to adult court in a 10-year period of time, only 1 did not have a diagnosed mental health condition prior to the offense that led to their transfer. They had the average number of priors amongst that group was, I think, 7. And we had started seeing them as young as 6 years old. So that data alone told us that we were missing something on the front end, and that maybe if it's not even just that we could have done something different to change the child's trajectory, but you got to remember that you don't get transferred to adult court for shoplifting or vandalism or something like that. You get transferred to adult court because you did something that hurt another person, killed somebody, was violent, caused serious injury. So if we could change the trajectory for those offenders, then we could have probably saved some lives and saved a whole lot of heartache and grief for their victims. Not to mention all the time and money and energy and resources poured into them. Transferring a kid to adult court in and of itself is an expensive process. So we convened our folks from around this part of the state, and we started looking at trying to come up with something that we could do differently. And what emerged was the idea of we already have a really effective safe baby court. A lot of y'all are familiar with that, and those are 0 to 3 children. Those are 0 to 36 months, because the recognition is there that when babies, sorry, I forgot to put this phone on mute. That babies, when we take them away from their parents, when their contact is limited or whatever, there's a price to pay for that. And that those interruptions in those early days carry on, have impacts through the rest of that child's life. So we thought, well, what if we expanded that concept a little bit? What if we extended those years up? Safe baby court works because you kind of, it's a court proceeding, and it carries all the legal weight of that. But it's it's also a less adversarial situation. It's done in a different setting. The room is set up different. People interact differently. You have the people who are relevant to that case around the table. It's not the judge is not up there in the robe and the gavels and all of that kind of stuff. It's a different environment. It's a different setting, and it facilitates people really having genuine conversations with each other about what needs to happen to change this situation. And so we thought, what if we expanded that concept up to, say, age 14, and we bring that same sort of thinking to those families. So when we get that 10-year-old child with a felony, or that 12-year-old that we've already seen half a dozen times, we convene the team around that child to kind of act out that same thing, to carry out those honest conversations about what can we do to change this pattern? What's the problem? If truancy is involved, why are we not going to school? If we're homeless, if we're hungry, what are the things that are contributing to the situation? Is it the people in the environment who are influencing this behavior? Is it a lack of supervision? What is it? Let's figure it out and see if we can address it sooner rather than later. And we know that mental health, substance abuse, all of those things are critical, huge, gigantic parts of this for those families. And so when we bring, so we brought a partner agency in Pathways, who would be, if we get this facility built, which is what we're waiting on word from the state on, if we get this facility built, it would serve children from 4 to 14, and Pathways would staff it. They would have people on site providing the mental health services, not only to the children, but also to the others in the household, parents, grandparents, whatever, because we know that a lot of times the unmet needs there is what leads to other, complicating factors. So we put together a proposal, and Judge Little put together a group, got all the folks from Nashville who would have input on this, the department, the commissioners of Department of Human Services, Department of Children's Services, Department of Teen Care attended remotely, and I'm trying to think who else was at the table. I think those were the big ones. Mental health. Yeah, I think we had everybody there. So they listened to the presentation. They agreed that this was something that they could get behind, that they could support in a collaborative way, using some of the recovery funds, the ARP funds. And so we passed that presentation along to them. They took it back to Nashville. They were supposed to meet with the governor about it. And then Blue Oval City, they got ready to make the Blue Oval City announcement. And so that meeting got moved. And so now we're just waiting on an answer for that. I had really hoped we would have that answer and be able to tell you that by today. But we don't. So we're still just waiting. The Henry Center would be located, the physical building would be located here where we are now. If you've ever been to our campus, there's a big empty space out in the middle, a hill. There's room for another building there. And so that would be where the Henry Center would be located. And the long-term vision, the long-term dream would be something like, if you're familiar with Carl Perkins Center, they started in Jackson and then expanded out to serve other counties. That's the long-term dream that the judge has for the Henry Center. It would start out in Jackson, and then that concept would prove itself effective, and then we could expand that to other counties. So I guess in a nutshell summary, children who come to the attention of the court between the ages of 4 and 14 on delinquent charges, either felonies or multiple anything kind of cases. And we would treat those similar to the manner that we do, say, baby court. We would bring everybody to the table who's working with that child and families, and let's figure out something that works, not a punitive solution, not that kind of thing. Let's figure out what's going on, what can we change, why is this situation where it is now, and how do we make it better going forward. So I know that's really quick and it's a lot of information, but I'm happy to answer specific questions if you have any. Jerry, did I hit all the high points that we talked about?
You sure did. That data is astounding. 78 youth and only one didn't have mental health, which, it's astounding, but I see it when I check the Wilder Center, because if you didn't know, that's one of mine that I check, and the cases are same. I would say 75% with mental health at least, and that's just diagnosed. So,
The number of
Yeah.
priors was shocking on some of the. I mean, one of the residents in the sample had 27 priors before he was transferred. 27 delinquent priors, and then he had a long DNN history with the court too. So some of that, you know, is just frustrating to me to look at and say, oh my gosh, why didn't we do this, that, or the other? Why didn't we see where this was headed? And yeah. You know, we had just this past week, we've had a 6, a 7, and a 9-year-old who took guns to school.
Don's asking, so a 4-year-old is charged with a delinquent act?
Thankfully, we haven't had that yet, but it is with all the guns in school things, it's happened elsewhere in the state. We haven't had it here in Madison County, but there's a real take no prisoners kind of thought process around all of that weapons at school kind of stuff. One would hope that would be a CPS matter more so than a delinquent case, but it has happened. And the logic for saying 4 to 14 is because we do have the safe baby court that goes 0 to 3. And so we didn't want to create a gap by saying, okay, these 4 to 6-year-olds are not really relevant to our discussion. So we'll start at 7 and go to 14. It just made more sense because we already had safe baby 0 to 3. Let's pick up at 4 and go to 14. And that covers all of our the youngest population that we're going to see.
And that also fit in with our Handle with Care work, since we were already looking at child care services to carry on with Handle with Care as well. So that makes sense too.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Amy, thank you for that. I want to hear more about it. And I think that goes along with the trauma-informed court, because you're trying to find out what has happened to this child. Why does it have to take 27 times for you to have contact with this child before services are actually put in place? You know, and I think all of the courts are dealing with that too. Now that we're seeing more and more youth being transferred over, it's like, where did we fail this child along the way? What things could have been put in place ahead of time so that this child wouldn't be at this place now? So I'm really interested in learning more about that. If you don't mind talking offline, it's interesting.
Absolutely, anytime. And one of the things that we built into the proposal is that everything from the structure of the building itself to the services that Pathways brings in, all of that, we have some folks in Madison County who are the certified trauma therapy providers. They're going to be part of every step of this, from the planning of the building to the services to everything, because we really want that understanding, that knowledge of ACEs and all of the trauma related stuff. We really want it to be a trauma informed facility, not just services. So we were real adamant that would be part of the plan too. Financially, the arrangement that we proposed was that the county will donate the land, and the state would help build the building by reimbursing the county over a period of years to get the building built and the services in place. And of course, you know, Pathways, they already know how to follow the revenue streams and get the reimbursement for their services, so that wasn't an obstacle. It's mainly just getting the building built. And we are going to shift a couple of members of our juvenile court services staff over to that facility, because we just believe so much that that's the right thing to do, and just shift staff away from some of our more, shall we call them, dated practices and into something like that just made a lot of sense.
Any other questions for Amy or comments? Well, thank you, Amy. At least we're getting a little progress and some movement, so hopefully we'll hear something soon.
Yeah, we were supposed to hear this week, but like I said, Blue Oval City, and so now we don't really know what the new timeline is, but there we go.
Well, Ford's exciting, but you know, I'd still like to have heard something.
I'm afraid it may exacerbate the need.
Well, thank you. Next on our agenda is TCCY Regional Coordinator updates. We have, if y'all will remember, we sent out our West Tennessee Juvenile Justice Directory that Gwen, Dana, and I work on, and we worked to update it. We did receive some updates, so we've added those to it. So when the follow-up email comes out, we'll have that updated one. Remember just to take a look at it. We know from a lot of agencies we've worked with, there's been some turnover, some people leaving, some people retiring. Just take a look at it so that we can add those and or correct or delete whatever we need to do, adjustments, so that we can send those out for all of you to have the most updated information. Want to, of course, remind everybody of the directories, resource directories that we work on and that we partner with. United Way West Tennessee has what's called the West Tennessee 211 Hub. If you haven't got on it yet, it's WTN211.org, and I can send that out as well with the that website with the follow-up email too. That's a really good website for resources. They've been keeping it updated pretty good, and it's also got a map so you can see everything, and that's all the resources in West Tennessee that put in their information through West Tennessee, through United Way West Tennessee. You can put your own information on there as well, and then they've got a way that they can link to each other if, for instance, RIFA needs something with another child serving agency, and maybe, or domestic violence may need a family that needs food with a food bank. They can refer through that system. It's a pretty cool website. So if you haven't checked it out, check that one out. Any other updates that I'm forgetting? Dana and Gwen, remember compilations are coming out soon, and we do have the online link for that. I can send that out with the follow-up as well. Anything else I'm forgetting, Dana or Gwen, for our TCCY updates?
Do you want to expand just a little on the handle with care, and that there are?
Oh, yes, sure. Our agenda was so packed I didn't add it this time because I thought we might have that come on. Hopefully we'll have some more updates after this coming fall break, which is coming up real soon, or some of us have already started fall breaks. Handle with Care, Amy and I and some of our TCCY coordinators in West Tennessee, along with United Way West Tennessee and some of our knowledge mobilization team for West Tennessee, are working on Handle with Care. We've been trying to get it started. Stephen Schofer with Tipton County YSO is not on today, but he's been really, really a major part in our Handle with Care efforts. If you don't know what Handle with Care is, it's basically just a note that the child that will be at a school system from a child's home. For instance, a child, let's say Amy was talking about a 4-year-old that had delinquent acts. So we'll say that kid at home that night, the reason he brought a gun to school or to daycare that morning was because that night he had encountered something at home. Police were called to the home. They could write out a note at that point and send it to wherever he was going the next day. So that teacher would know in advance that that child needed to be handled with care. So we've been trying to get it started all across West Tennessee. We've had good efforts. Shelby County's had some good efforts with it, but we were really stalled in rural West because it was just hard to get everybody on the same page. Stephen Schofer at Tipton County got a couple of the school systems to work on it. And then even in Madison County, we started, Amy, it's probably been almost 3 years now that we've been trying to get it really going in Madison County. And it took Matthew Marshall with United Way West Tennessee. I see Dana's face. We love Matt Marshall. It took Matt to get it really kicked into high gear. As of this fall break, back up 2 months ago, around summertime, he started really hitting it hard with the Chiefs of Police Association and the school systems in Madison County. And he got everybody on board. He did there's a web-based Handle with Care now through United Way and West Tennessee. And as of after fall break, all the social behavioral specialists in 5 pilot schools in Madison County will be trained in Handle with Care and begin that process right after fall break starts. So we'll have 3 elementary schools, 1 high school, and 1 middle school in Madison County to pilot the web-based program that will start off hopefully a wave of progress across West Tennessee. And we can follow back up with Matt hopefully after fall break and see how the pilot's going. And so maybe on our next roundtable, we can have Matt talk about the progress on that. Stephen Schofer also trained, though he helped come down and train the social workers and the behavioral specialists in those 5 pilot schools. So hopefully we'll have some really good movement now.
And Matt has, people have reached out to him, like from other counties, mayors, police chiefs, and school superintendents. And he has gone and has gone to those counties and done a presentation. And so both in in all of rural West. And so if your county, or if you know your superintendent or police chief or whoever is on board with this, please have them to reach out to Matt Marshall, and we will send his contact information to you. But if you forget, you can always go through one of us with TCCY, and we'll get you directed to Matt. But he really goes in and brings all the players together. And so Matt is also agreed to to develop the portals for each of the school systems, and or for each of the Handle with Care programs in each of the counties or school districts. So they are really going above and beyond, and we just want to see this. I know Handle with Care is really widespread in Upper East Tennessee, and so now it's our turn to make sure that happens in West Tennessee. And I just might add, United Way, it's just amazing what all is going on right now. They have a Bright Starts Tennessee initiative, which is going to look at all the factors of 0 to 8 and making sure kids are on grade level. But it's not just about the educational portion, it's also about supportive systems in place. It's about being healthy, mental and physical health. So there's a lot of components, but you will be hearing more about that as well. And so there's a lot of money out there through TANF and the CARES Act and other. So just keep your ears open. We expect big things to be announced, hopefully very soon.
And anytime we ask Matt to speak, we end up having 3 or 4 items. He usually says he can't be the whole show, but a lot of times he could very well be the whole show. We love our Matt Marshall. Gwen, and Dana, any other updates, TCCY updates, or anything else that I'm forgetting?
Well, just to let you know, we do compliance monitoring, and they alluded to that, but we monitor, we are Tennessee's agency that monitors for the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And so we monitor on the federal cycle, which is October 1st through September 30th. So our monitoring window of going into those adult facilities, court holdings, police precincts, police departments, prisons that may hold remanded youth, adjudicated, been transferred from juvenile court to adult court. And so that's October 1st through December 30th. So we are required by the feds to do an in-person visit at each of those facilities and get a report and some other things. But I've already reached out to some of the courts who have some involvement with court holding. But we just want you to know that, we'll be out there at the sheriff's departments, police departments and stuff. So if somebody calls y'all and say, who is this person or what are they doing here? They may have a new director, you just, say, us, whether you want to or not, just say good things about us. And so, also, but I did want you to know that usually we have the compilations that we can, begin to share at the time we're doing our facility monitoring. We're hoping that those big books are going to come in. We do have received the online link, and so we'll make sure you get that as well as part of this package, just to have another way too. So the online link for the new compilations is out, and we'll make sure you get that as well.
All right, Dana and Jerry, anything else?
I don't have anything.
Does anyone else have any other announcements they'd like to make? Okay. If not, just again, thank you to all of our wonderful presenters. We really appreciate their information and insight. A lot's going on as usual, and that's not anything different, but a lot is going on. And we want to thank you all for being here with us today. You should receive a certificate for your attendance here in the next week or two. So if there's nothing else, we are done here, and we wish you all a safe and wonderful weekend. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.